Have you ever earned more and ended up poorer? Sounds insane. But for thousands of Americans, this is reality every single day. 2019. Daniel Walker, a corporate attorney in Chicago. Salary $180,000 a year. A prestigious firm on Michigan Avenue. Tom Ford suits. Omega watch. A BMW 5 Series on lease. In his bank account, $1,200. For years later, everything changed. His salary dropped to $95,000. The suits were swapped for jeans. He sold the car. And in his accounts and investments, over $200,000. The next 20 minutes are not motivational nonsense about skip the latte. You're going to learn the exact system a real person used to break the most dangerous trap for high-earning professionals. A trap business schools never talk about. The golden cage. One caveat. The name and some details have been changed at the subject's request. But the numbers, strategies, and timeline are real. This is a composite story based on actual cases of lawyers who walked this path. Daniel Walker didn't come from a poor family. Father, an engineer. Mother, a schoolteacher in a Detroit suburb. Normal middle class. University of Michigan, law school. Student debt, $87,000. Remember that number. It'll come back. At 26, he was hired by Baker & Morrison, a boutique law firm. Not top 50, but with a solid reputation. Clients, manufacturing companies, family businesses doing tens of millions in revenue. Complex corporate disputes, M&A deals, the occasional defense of directors against shareholders. First year, $120,000 plus bonuses. Second year, $150. Third year, $180. Sounds like a graduate's dream. But there was one detail. The office was in a building across from the Four Seasons. Clients rolled up in Teslas and Range Rovers. The firm's partners wore $15,000 watches and casually discussed where they'd spent the weekend, Aspen or the Hamptons. And nobody said it out loud, but everyone understood. If you meet a client in a $300 suit from Macy's, you don't look like someone they'd trust with an $8 million deal. Daniel started playing the game. Bought the suits. Leased the BMW $850 a month. Moved into an apartment in Lincoln Park, $2,400 a month instead of his old $1,100. His income had grown by 50%. His savings disappeared. Wait, how is that even possible? And more importantly, how did he climb out of this hole without abandoning his profession? The answer will be simpler than you think. And more painful than you'd like. Golden handcuffs, that's what they call it on Wall Street and in Silicon Valley. According to a Harris poll from 2025, nearly 1 in 3 Americans with a 6-figure income says they're financially barely staying afloat or drowning. And 64% admit that a 6-figure salary is no longer a sign of wealth. It's survival mode. You earn a lot, but you spend even more. Because your environment, your clients, and even your colleagues judge you by outward markers. Lawyers, consultants, bankers, they all fall into this trap. Here's how it works. A client pays you $500 an hour not just for expertise. They're paying for a feeling of security. And if their attorney pulls up to a meeting in a 2012 Honda Civic, subconsciously a question forms. Maybe he's not that successful? Maybe his services aren't that valuable. Nobody will say it out loud. But the contract will go to the competitor in Brioni with a Rolex Submariner. Daniel figured this out after 6 months. One of the partners said it directly. We're not just selling legal services. We're selling status. The client needs to feel they're working with winners. The logic is airtight, but lethal. Because expenses were growing faster than income. Suits, $4,000 a year. Shoes, another $1,000. The car, $10,000 when you factor in the lease, gas, and downtown Chicago parking. Housing, almost $30,000. Client lunches, another $6,000 or $7,000. And that was just the mandatory minimum. By 29, Daniel was earning $180,000. After taxes, about $115,000 remained. $60,000 to $65,000 of that went to maintaining the image. Another $30,000 to normal life, food, insurance, minimum student loan payments. That left $20,000 to $25,000 a year. On paper. In reality, zero. because there was always an unexpected expense. Replacing tires on the BMW 1200. A gift for a client's firm anniversary, 400. A suit that ripped during a hearing, another 1800. Small things that devoured the buffer completely. Daniel realized he wasn't building wealth. He was running on a hamster wheel. Except the wheel was carbon fiber, and the hamster was wearing a custom-tailored suit. The turning point came in March of 2020. The pandemic. Offices shut down. Courts moved to Zoom. Clients froze their budgets. The firm announced a temporary 20% pay cut. Daniel sat in his expensive apartment, looked at a closet full of suits nobody could see, and recognized the absurdity of the situation. For the last 3 months, he'd been appearing in court through a laptop. Blazer and tie on top, shorts on the bottom. Clients were happy with the results. Not once did anyone ask about his car or his watch. Because on Zoom you can't see them. And then something strange became clear. When the need to spend on packaging disappeared, his expenses dropped by 40%. On his reduced salary of $144,000, he suddenly started saving more than he ever had at $180,000. In the first 4 months of the pandemic, March through July of 2020, Daniel saved $18,000, more than in the previous 2 years combined. He realized the problem wasn't income. The problem was the system. In the fall of 2020, offices began reopening. The firm's partners pushed for a return to the old format. Clients want to see us in person. We need to rebuild relationships. Daniel tried going back. It didn't work. He'd already tasted freedom. For the first time in 3 years, he had a cushion in his account, small but real. And returning to the old spending felt like a betrayal of himself. He made a radical decision. He quit Baker & Morrison. Colleagues thought he'd lost his mind. You're throwing away your career for what? To save $20,000 a year? In 10 years you'll have 200, so what? That's pocket change in our profession. But Daniel saw the picture differently. He found a job at a mid-sized law firm in Austin, Texas. Salary $95,000. $85,000 less than Chicago. But the format was different. The firm specialized in corporate disputes and startup structuring. Most of the work was remote. Office dress code, business casual, jeans acceptable. No client dinners at $200 a head restaurants. And one more bonus: frequent travel. This matters. Keep this fact in your head, it'll pay off later. Because when the company covers flights, hotels, rental cars, and per diem, your personal expenses drop to nearly zero. Daniel spent 12 to 15 days a month on the road. He rented an apartment in Austin for $900, small, but he was only there to sleep. No car, Uber, and car sharing. In his first full year in Austin, on a salary of $95,000, he put $42,000 into savings, and simultaneously sent $10,000 toward early repayment of his student loan. Savings rate 55% of net income. In Chicago, at $180,000, he'd been saving 18%. On a good month. Numbers don't lie. Seemed like a victory. In reality, it was just the beginning. And the hardest moment was still ahead. 6 months into Austin, Daniel woke up at 3 in the morning. In a small apartment on the edge of the city. Outside the window, a parking lot. In the fridge, leftover rice from yesterday. And one question in his head: what am I doing? Old classmates from Michigan were posting photos from Aspen. A former colleague at Baker & Morrison had gotten promoted, now a senior partner, salary north of $300,000. An ex-girlfriend called on Thanksgiving, asked how he was doing, and you could hear it in her voice. She felt sorry for him. Daniel sat with his phone and thought, maybe the colleagues were right? Maybe $42,000 a year really is pocket change? Maybe he just got scared of the big game and ran, dressing it up as a strategy? No answer. Silence. 3 a.m. He opened his banking app, looked at the balance, $58,000. Looked at the remaining loan balance, $62,000. Negative $4,000. Net. All his savings an illusion. As long as the loan was hanging over him, he was in the red. This is the part they leave out of the pretty stories about financial freedom. The nights when the numbers don't match the feelings. The moment when you've already left the old life, but the new one isn't built yet. Daniel could have given up, gone back to Chicago, called the partners, apologized, squeezed back into the suit. He didn't give up, because he understood the key thing. Cutting expenses is the foundation. But a foundation is not a house. To build fast, you need a different kind of income. Not just more money. A different architecture of income. He started studying how certain lawyers had $500,000 or $1 million in capital by 35. Not partners at major firms, that's a given, they own equity. Just regular practicing attorneys. Turns out they had 3 things in common. First, they worked not on hourly rates but on outcomes. Second, they found a narrow niche where competition was low and fees were high. Third, they knew how to say no to cheap clients. Sounds simple, but how do you apply it when you're 29, in the red, and living in an apartment overlooking a parking lot? Daniel analyzed his strengths. Turned out he loved appearing in court. Most lawyers are terrified of courtroom hearings. Shaking hands, stuttering speech, fear of the judge. But Daniel felt at home there. Sharp arguments, quick responses to questions, the ability to dismantle the opponent's position in real time. This is called an unfair advantage. What's a nightmare for others is a thrill for you. He launched a barrister model like in the UK. He didn't work directly with clients. He worked for other lawyers. They handled the paperwork, contracts, pretrial prep, filings. And Daniel walked into court and argued their case. Hourly billing? No. A flat fee per case. $8,000 to $25,000 depending on complexity. One case took an average of 40 to 60 hours, prep, hearings, appeals. That meant an effective rate of $130 to $400 an hour. Already more interesting than a salary. But the real advantage was flexibility. He could take 3 cases a month and earn $40,000 to $50,000. Or take one complex case and devote all his time to it. At the same time, Daniel started developing a narrow specialty, trusts and asset protection. In the US, there's an instrument called an irrevocable trust. It's a legal structure that shields assets from creditors, lawsuits, and even division in a divorce. Anyone can create a trust, but structuring it correctly, that's the highest level. You need to know the tax code, state laws, court precedents. Most lawyers won't touch it. Too many nuances. Daniel Dovein got certified in estate planning, spent 6 months studying hundreds of cases, and he started offering a service, turnkey trust creation for $15,000 to $35,000, depending on asset volume. Target audience: small and mid-sized business owners with a net worth between $500,000 and $5 million. Not ultra-wealthy, but not poor either. People who have something to protect but can't afford a top firm charging $100,000 for the structure. His first client came through a referral in February of 2022. Owner of a chain of car washes in Houston. Assets $1.2 million. Worried about lawsuits from franchisees. Daniel created a family trust for him, structured the business transfer, set up the payout schedule. Fee, $22,000. Time invested, 95 hours over 2 months. Effective rate, $230 an hour. But that's not all. The second strategy, long money. Daniel stopped taking small tasks. Company registration for $1,500? No. A boilerplate contract for $800? No. Why? Because those clients come once. They're shopping for the lowest price. They want a transaction, not a relationship. Instead, he focused on tasks that build trust. A consultation on business structure, free or nominal. A risk assessment for a modest fee. The client gets value, remembers the name, and a year later, when they need to sell their company for $3 million, they come back. And that's when the fee is $40,000 to $60,000. It's an asymmetric bet. You give an hour now, you get a month of income later. The third strategy, geographic arbitrage. By 2022, thousands of court hearings across the U.S. were being conducted remotely every day, especially civil cases, arbitrations, pretrial conferences. Daniel realized, why pay for housing in Austin if he could work from anywhere? He started traveling. 3 months, Mexico, Playa del Carmen. 2 months, Portugal, Lisbon. 1 month, Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh City. The rest of the time, affordable cities in the States. Boise, Tulsa, Greenville. He earned at big city rates: Chicago, New York, LA. He lived in places where dinner costs $8 and an apartment runs $600 a month. In Playa del Carmen, he rented a studio for $550. Lunches, $5 to $7. Co-working space, $80 a month. Total expenses, about $1,200 a month. During this time, his income climbed to $11,000 to $14,000 a month thanks to trusts and his barrister practice. Savings rate shot up to nearly 90%. But here's what else happened, and this is the detail I promised at the beginning. Remember the student debt of $87,000? By the end of 2021, after aggressive payments, he'd brought it down to $62,000. In 2022, when the trust money started flowing, Daniel paid it off entirely. One payment, $62,000, and the loan that had hung over him for 7 years was gone. He later called that day his second resignation from the debt cage. That's why the account balances didn't grow as fast as you might think. Part of the money went to clearing the past. For 2022, after paying off the loan and all expenses, the net increase in capital was $68,000. For 2023, another $73,000. For 2024, $49,000. Less because Daniel deliberately slowed down, took fewer cases, spent the summer in Portugal, started running in the mornings, stopped checking his banking app every day. By the start of 2025, in accounts and investments, he had $208,000. But the most interesting thing wasn't the moment the number appeared. It was what that number changed. Daniel invested $175,000 in a diversified portfolio, S&P 500 index ETFs, bonds, a small allocation to real estate funds. A conservative strategy. Historical average return, about 6 to 7% annually after inflation, though the last 3 years the market had posted double-digit gains. Daniel didn't count on that, he calculated using the minimum. By conservative estimates, about $11,000 to $13,000 in passive income per year, or roughly $1,000 a month. Pocket change? Not exactly, because when you have a guaranteed $1,000 a month, you can say no to any client you don't like. You can turn down a case where you'd have to defend a scumbag. You can pass on a project that would drain 3 months of your life for $15,000. Capital is not yachts and Lamborghinis. Capital is professional freedom. Daniel said later, "The strangest feeling is when money stops being a source of anxiety and becomes a tool for choice." Before, he took everything that came his way, because he had to pay for the apartment, the car, the suits, the loan. His calendar was packed with cases, half of which were boring, draining, with difficult people. Now he could choose. A client came along, a startup founder building a platform for small businesses. Interesting challenge, reasonable person, complex structure with options and vesting. Small fee, $8,000. Daniel took it because it was interesting. Another came along, a developer who needed to find a loophole in zoning to build a shopping center in a residential area against the wishes of local residents. Fee, $35,000. Daniel turned it down. 2 years earlier, he couldn't have afforded to. Now he could. And here's what's remarkable. When he stopped chasing every dollar, his income grew. Because clients can sense desperation. They can tell when a lawyer takes a case for the money versus when they take it for the outcome. Daniel's reputation shifted. People started recommending him not as affordable, but as the guy who actually knows his stuff and doesn't push unnecessary services. By the middle of 2025, his average trust fee had risen to $28,000. And the number of clients he turned away had tripled. The paradox. The more often he said no, the more he earned. 32 years old. $208,000 in accounts and investments. Zero debt. It's not $1 million. It's not a yacht in Miami. But it is control over his life. Daniel returned to what he'd loved about law since his first year of school. The intellectual challenge. Helping people through complicated situations. Courtroom appearances where every word carries weight. He stopped dreading Mondays. Stopped counting the days until vacation. Because work became a choice again, not a sentence. Remember the beginning? $180,000 in income, $1,200 in the bank. $95,000 in income, $208,000 in capital. It was never about the money. It was about the system. Status spending is not just showing off. It's a structural trap for entire professions. Lawyers, consultants, finance professionals, architects, everyone who sells expertise is forced to sell an image along with it. There's only one way out of this game. Change the rules. Stop playing on someone else's field. Find clients who don't care about your car. Find a work format where you don't have to spend money on packaging. And most importantly, build capital that gives you the right to choose. It doesn't have to be $200,000. Even $50,000 and $250 a month in passive income, that's already a cushion that lets you say no to a toxic client. And when you can say no, you stop being a hired gun and become a true professional. A question for you: how much of your income goes to maintaining the image? A car you need not for yourself but for your clients? Clothes you wear not because you like them but because it's expected? An apartment in a prestigious neighborhood even though you're only there to sleep? Calculate it. Right now. Drop the number in the comments. I'm curious to see what percentage everyone's at. And if you want to dig deeper, here's what you should do today. First, download statements from all your investment accounts. A single PDF could save you hundreds of thousands if your broker gets sanctioned or goes bankrupt. Second, write down the 3 most expensive recurring expenses that exist purely for status. Not for pleasure, not for health, for status. And ask yourself, can you live without them? Third, find your unfair advantage. What do you do effortlessly that others struggle with? That's your asset. Don't bury it. If the story hit home, drop a like. The algorithm will show this video to others sitting in the golden cage and looking for a way out. Subscribe. We break down real strategies here, not motivational fluff. And remember, high income does not equal wealth. Wealth is when you control your time, and control starts with capital.